Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. If you want to be successful, you have to shape your destiny. Today, Stefan Falk will show us how. Stefan, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Bill. It's a pleasure being here.
Stefan, I think I told you before the show, you've written a book, Intrinsic Motivation. And when I saw that book, I usually rate authors. They send me books anywhere from C to B to A plus. You exceeded all of them. You got a great on the cover. So, and meaning I wrote that on there. So I really thank you for being with us today. And I hope you can help myself and our audience to achieve some level of greatness and certainly improve what we're doing.
Okay. Thanks so much, Bill, for the kind words.
And you're actually an executive coach. Am I defining you correctly?
Yeah. And the way I sort of describe it myself, at least that's always my aspiration, is to, help people to achieve things that they didn't think they were capable of. I mean, that has always been my reward, I think, throughout my whole life, to see that the happiness, in the face when they pursue something, then they really doubt, I can't do this. And then all of a sudden they do it. And I think that the experience of achieving something that you didn't think you were capable of, I think that's an addictive experience. You want to relive that again and again and again. And I think that's one of the part of the recipes of success. You take on stuff that you don't think you're capable of. Most people don't. They just say, I don't have the talent for that. I'm not going to do it. And that's just like a path to, I would not say hell, but to a bad place, when you think about that.
Well, that's why we obviously wanted to have you on today, and we're so excited about it, because you're like that professional coach who takes the best players in the world, whether they're basketball, football, baseball, and makes them even better. And if you can do that with those guys, I'm going to count myself as being one of the masses. We have a lot of room for improvement. I think you're going to help us a great way. And as you said, whenever we improve on anything, even if it's just fixing a tire or doing some work in the backyard, we feel good about ourselves. So hopefully we'll come out that way today. But I want to ask you, as I read your book, starting off in the beginning, you mentioned that you work with the FBI. In what capacity do you work with them, and how do they get better through your efforts?
Well, it sort of, it was not, working with them, on cases or anything like that. I actually sought them out to learn from them. And this is early on. This is, I think, 25 years ago. And how it came about was that I had a few aspirations, back then when I was much younger. One was to figure out, why is it so hard to lead change in companies? I also had an aspiration that if I end up as a leader, I really want to be a good leader. And then for whatever reason, I figured out that maybe I need to know a thing or two about behavioral science and neuroscience. And this is mid-90s. So it's way before, neuroscience and everything become popular and a household name. And then when I thought about who could possibly know a thing or two about this, well, most likely any type of outfit or organization that deals with, life and death. Well, that is really important. And then, I had some friends that had connections to the FBI. So they connected me then to you have seen the TV series, The Criminal Minds. So basically back then it was called FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, all the people that do the profiling of serial killers and all these things. So I spent time with them, more learning about understanding, human motivation, how to do assessment of people and all these things. And that was completely fascinating. I remember the first meeting I had, and that was with John Douglas. He's now, I think, a famed author and whatever, and he consults with, police departments when they have unsolved crimes. And I remember the first time we met, he he sort of started to show me crime scene photos. He had this old projector, shooting on the wall, crime scenes. And he started to talk about what he saw in the crime scenes, what it said about the perpetrator and all these things. And then after 10 slides, he then showed me the 11th slide, said, okay, now Stefan, it's your turn. What do you see here? And I'm like, and looked at the crime scene. And then I saw that most likely that it was a murder had taken place and there was a big rock with lots of, blood on it. So I said that, well, I think that maybe this is not planned, because you probably don't plan to kill someone with a rock, so maybe it's not premeditated. Okay, that was what I came up with. And then he said, you know your stuff. Well, of course I didn't, but I learned a ton from the FBI guys. They are, and girls, I mean, they are magnificent in understanding human behavior. And one of the things I learned is that don't listen to what people say. Look at what people do, because that really reveals the true motivations of people. And that's what I've been spending my life doing. I've been working with people, but not just talking to them, observing how they do things. And that's important.
And now I see why you'd fit in well with the FBI. Now, I read in your book, you say you don't tolerate bad thinking. But how would you define that term, bad thinking, in your world?
Bad thinking is, any tendency to think about yourself as a victim. Okay, that's it. Any type of attempt of blaming others for your failures. Okay, complaining, whining about stuff like that. Because when you allow that into your life, I view that as handicapping as that you would amputate your legs and your arms, okay? You will not achieve anything if you make it a habit of blaming others for your failures or blaming others for how you feel about yourself. You have one tool to use, and that is your brain. And you can decide how your brain will work. And that's the secret of everything in life, that you do that. So I don't accept that. So for instance, I start all my coaching sessions, I always start with beyond the agenda, what we should talk about. I say, okay, so what's new and exciting? And if a client doesn't have anything exciting to share with me, I just ask him or her if they're an idiot. Okay. Because excitement is in your head, and it's how you think about and what you expect to happen that would be exciting that makes it exciting. And so it's basically a little bit about brain training. And we should also know that if you think about the fact, Bill, that we are born with 5 basic emotions, 4 of which are negative and 1 is positive. And the negative ones are sadness, I think it's disgust, it's fear, and it's anger, okay? And the positive one is happiness. From an evolutionary standpoint, that is logical, because we come from a much, much harsher environment. So it's logical that we are born with more negative expectations than positive ones, okay? Because if we are too positive, we could die. But that means that the brain is built to easily end up in negative states of mind. So it takes actual active work to push yourself into the more positive views. Okay, you need to rewire your brain. And that's why I don't accept any negative behaviors.
Now, you're very good about this. I told you, I love reading your book, but you're also self-depreciating at the beginning, because you mentioned a section where when you were giving a talk or presenting about your book, you asked your son what to say, and I think his response was, tell him you're crazy. Why does your son think you're crazy?
I think my son, his explanation, because, I asked him, I need to write something about myself. And he said, you have to be honest. Well, that's my plan. So what should I say? Well, say that you're crazy. And I said, what do you mean with that? Well, you're the only person in the universe you can't be bored. And that's true. I can't be bored. I refuse that. That's also a negative thing. I refuse boredom, because nothing good comes from boredom. I think that's actually one of my very, very few acquired skills that has helped me a lot, and it's very, very tied to, building the ability to unlock your intrinsic motivation. Because in any type of job, in any type of domain, in order to reach your goals, you will stumble into things that doesn't naturally interest you or you think is boring, okay? But if you don't pursue them and pursue them in a good way, you will not be successful. And you cannot pursue anything in a good way if you're bored. Because when you're bored, you're distracted. And also your brain works slower, which of course detrimentally affects your performance. So finding a way to make even the most boring things, I would not say fun, but at least interesting, is a key life skill. And I think that's one of the few skills I have.
Well, I'm sure there's many more, but Stefan, we want to find out more about intrinsic motivation. But at this point in the show, we like to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Stefan, spelled Stefan, Falk, Falk. His book is Intrinsic Motivation. And Stefan, I think you'd mentioned me there's a website that we can learn more. Would you tell our audience about that website?
Yeah, it's the website is called learntoLoveYourWork.com. And there you find some information about me and a few definitions of intrinsic motivation. And I think, more importantly there, that I think the key logic for intrinsic motivation is that if you have any aspiration to reach your goals, to learn skills effectively and fast, to have, I would say, a happy, satisfactory life, as well as also develop a very healthy brain. Learning how to unlock your intrinsic motivation is probably one of the most important things that you need to do. If you don't do it, you risk actually becoming bored and even becoming sick from what you do. Okay.
Now I'm sorry, Stefan.
Yeah. No. So that's that's what I want to say about the importance of intrinsic motivation.
You use the letters FEO, and I had to look through your book to say, what does FEO stand for? And it's focus on exciting outcomes. How can we do that? I mean, if we have a routine job, not necessarily a boring job or a bad one, but if we have kind of the routine job, sometimes there are quiet hours, sometimes it's ridiculously busy. And for some other people, the balance may be more slow going than exciting. Is there some way to make a job exciting or to get this in, or can you give us some recommendations?
Well, it goes back to what I say. I refuse boredom, okay? And I also refuse to think that anything is too difficult to actually pursue. Okay, so there's a few things I never allowed to myself, because fundamentally it has to do with how you think about what you're supposed to do. Okay, and the plan you come up for pursuing what you think you should do and how you should do it. And I think one of the smartest way to build this ability to make even the most boring thing, even the most difficult thing, or even whatever it is that you don't feel like doing, more interesting and exciting, is to think about what is it that I really want to achieve by pursuing this. Okay. And there are a couple of ways to do that. So for instance, if you need to do something that is super boring and you've done it 3 million times, okay, one of the reasons why we think it's boring is that because the task doesn't represent any challenge for us anymore, okay? So you need to create your own challenge, in how you pursue the task. And one way to do that is to think about what would be an exciting outcome here. And in the simplest terms, and I find there two ways to think about the outcome that is, I think, comes natural to us and very easily makes the most boring task very interesting. And one is to use the time element. So let's say you do something that you think is very boring and it usually takes you an hour and a half to do it. Start to think about, what if I can do this in 45 minutes instead? Okay. How would I go about it to do that and still achieve sort of an okay result in it, or maybe even a better result? How can I cut time in half and create a better result? That all of a sudden you have an interesting problem to think about. And that just starts the process of making this boring thing more interesting for you to pursue. Because the trick with intrinsic motivation is actually not the outcome itself. It is coming up with a plan for how to pursue the outcome. Because when you're then in the activity and you have the plan, you actually get direct feedback on how you're doing. And that is the essence of triggering your intrinsic motivation.
Now, Stefan, I know in your book you bring out the point that we should love what we do. And when we love what we do, it's no longer an effort. Is that the key? And have you ever come across somebody you worked with in a coaching capacity where they're doing it, but it's either for the money or the job has changed over the years and they no longer really love it?
Yes, yes, and that happens. So this is sort of, I think, I don't know if it's a paradox or just simply a fact of life that even if you start doing something and you really love it, there is a risk that you will stop loving it over time. The key reason for that is not that the environment changes. So whatever you're doing is not lovable, in the context of where it's done. It has the main reason for it is that you stop challenging yourself. Okay. So I did some work together with, maybe you know him. He passed, was it last year or the year before that? K. Anders Ericsson. He wrote the book Peak Performance, and he talks about deliberate practice. And in his world, and based on his research, what sets sort of the expert performer, like the Roger Federers, Rafael Nadals of the world, the David Bowies of the world, or whoever is really at the top of their game, so to speak, from aspiring performers or like normal performers, is that the expert performer never ever stops challenging him or herself in improving what they do and how they do it. Okay, details of the game, tweaking, experimenting, trial and error, and they do it on a daily basis. So
I like that point. Difference. That's very good. In fact, I'm jotting that down right now because really, of course, with anything, if we can keep challenging ourselves, it's going to be interesting, and we're going to get some breakthroughs somewhere along the way.
Yeah. But I'm not talking about, you don't have to be crazy about this. It's not like, oh my God, I need to challenge myself through a whole workday. No, we don't have mental energy for that. Forget about it. We have limited energy, and the body is extremely conservative how it spends its energy. It's also an evolutionary thing, because having a surplus of energy has been one of the key survival strategies for actually all living things, I would say, beyond human beings. So it's very hesitant about spending energy. And of course, pushing yourself, rethinking things, whatever, draws a lot of energy. But a very good way to start is to say, every day, I want to experiment to, pursue at least one of my tasks. It could be a meeting. It could be sort of an individual task. I want to pursue that in a different way and achieve a different, better, more interesting result. Just one thing a day is a super good start. Okay. Super good start to do it.
Now, Stefan, you mentioned that we should look to achieve whatever we're looking to achieve. We should write them down and kind of in a continuum of tomorrow, next week, and for life. How far out do you go in the things you want to achieve? Do you go to the end of the month, really? Do you literally go to the end of life, or how far out should we go?
This is the way I operate myself, and this is also the way I aspire to interest my clients to think about things. Okay, and it's basically you have this like barbell strategy for what you spend your time thinking on. Okay, so two opposites basically. One is, your long-term ambitions and dreams and whatever it is. And that could be sort of long-term business goals or whatever it is. Okay. And that could be a month, that could be a year, it could be 5 years, whatever it is. But, some kind of sense of where do you want to take your life, your professional life and your achievements. Okay. More long-term. That's one. The other opposite of that is the daily experimentation. Okay. You do something daily that is in some way relevant for that more long-term thinking. Okay. That's my planning horizon. I seldom do sort of a monthly plan or like a quarterly plan or a yearly plan. I have these big dreams and fantasies that I cultivate. And then I make sure that whatever I'm doing in a way that feels a little bit linked to that long-term dream or fantasy, because it's actually doable. And I also want to say that to people, that there's so many elements of human, health, performance, satisfaction, in the business world that is completely forgotten. We don't talk about it. For instance, fantasizing, dreaming about stuff. There's nobody talks about that. It's super important that we do that, because if you think about fantasizing and you think about the fact that the brain cannot discern from what is really happening and what is just a thought. Okay,
I hear you.
It's the greatest simulator that ever be. Forget about AI. You could forget about it. But the greatest simulator there is the human brain. So when you fantasize about, for instance, becoming the most admired leader in your company, you start to fantasize about how does that look, when does it happen? What do people say to me? But and every time you think about it, your brain doesn't know if it's happening or not. So you almost live the same emotions as it would actually happen. And what happens over time is that the fantasy doesn't become enough. You want to live that. You want to actually experience that in real life. So you actually start to execute. That's one of the powers of fantasizing. The second power of fantasizing is that you never ever only fantasize about the outcome, the end state. You also fantasize and think about the way there. So in a way, it's problem solving. In a way, it's also planning. So when you start to execute, you're actually more prepared. So fantasizing is super important. Now, this, going back to FBI, is one of the things I learned when I hung out with these guys, because fantasizing, unfortunately, also works really well when you think about bad things. So, for instance, the serial killers of the world, they have very vivid fantasies about what they want to do. And they fantasize, and in the beginning of their career, so to speak, the fantasy is enough. Okay, so they live out all the darkness in the fantasies and get sort of the satisfaction from that. Unfortunately, over time, the fantasy is not enough and they start to act out. So fantasizing is very important. Another thing is having fun. It's not a felony to laugh at work, and to laugh at yourself and to have fun and say, how can we make this meeting super fun and exciting and rewarding? Okay. It's not a felony, but people act like if I do that, I will be put in prison.
Stefan, once again, we want our audience to know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Stefan Falk, Falk. His book is Intrinsic Motivation. And Stefan, we're going to ask you, would you give us that website where we can find out more information?
LearnToLoveYourWork.com.
LearnToLoveYourWork.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm sure our audience is going to be looking at that website. We want to love our work. We want to advance. We want that motivation. And I think it's a win-win on all points. Now, most times we hear that it's good to have a checklist, but I know in your book you make a point of saying you don't like using checklists. What's wrong with that, and what should we substitute?
Well, if you start with the brain and how it operates, and if you want to satisfy your brain hates like fragmentation. Okay, your brain wants to have a consolidated view for the simple reason that it gives your brain a sense of control. And I would say that the sense of control is probably one of the most important psychological needs we have, given that we come from, our ancestors' highly uncertain environment, okay? Now, if you have checklists and you have things you should supposed to do and, think about or whatever spread out, okay, that's not good. My recommendation is have your whole life in your calendar. Your calendar is probably one of the most underutilized tools there are. Most people only use it for meetings, okay? In my world, you should use your calendar for everything. Private things, professional things, individual tasks, things that you think you're going to pursue, but you're not certain you're going to pursue, ideas that you come up with that you want to pursue, put them in your calendar, So that's how I work. If I sit, let's say you and I work together, Bill, and I view all my clients as my kids, which means that, or my children, which means that I'm thinking about them constantly without any effort. And let's say I sit down and I see a documentary about, I saw the documentary about this sushi chef, Gyro, the other night, just blow my mind. But there were certain things in that were so relevant for a couple of my clients. What do? I open my phone calendar, and then I put maybe then the day after, elaborate on the ideas I got from the Gyro documentary for Jake and Bill and Pam or whatever, okay? Put it in tomorrow, okay? Bunk. Then it exists. It's there. I don't even know if I'm going to pursue it at that time, but I have it in my calendar. If I don't pursue it at that time, I just push it ahead. So everything I ever plan to do, I think I'm going to do, I'm not certain about to do, and the things I am going to do, whether it's individual stuff or meetings, is in my calendar. It's perfect. It gives you a great sense of control. And it also gives you a chance to be ahead of time. If I look at myself, and this is a habit I try to promote with my clients, I wake up very early. I'm a morning person.
Stefan, I have to excuse me now. We're running out of time, so we don't cut you off. And no, thank you. It's been so interesting. I wish we could stay on for another hour. But before we wrap up, I want our audience to know, if you love what you're hearing as I do, our guest has been Stefan, Stefan Falk, Falk. The book is Intrinsic Motivation. And real quick, Stefan, could you give us that website?
LearnToLoveYourWork.com.
Stefan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to let our audience know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.